Welcome to the Witchy and Wonky podcast, a space for spiritual raving baddies embodying all things music, manifestation, mindset, and magic. I'm your host, Rachel Brady, a digital vibe creator and storyteller who views festivals as portals, headbanging as healing, and raving as group therapy. Whether you're deep in your spiritual journey, reframing your subconscious beliefs, or just trying to figure things out, you're in the right place. Join me today as we lock in and get weird. Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Witchy and Wonky podcast. If you are coming back from the first two episodes, welcome back. I'm so happy you are here as we continue to grow this community and just yap around universal mindset shifts, universal laws, music, manifestation, festivals, magic, all that fun stuff. And today I really wanted to hone in on this Law of Detachment, which we will get into in a little bit. But just for context, I really wanted to release this around the Christmas time, New Year time, because I always joke that the end of the year, in this last 2 weeks, it always feels like a universal waiting room. And it always feels like this weird transitional liminal in-between space where the new year hasn't begun just yet, but the old year still feels like it's over. So you're kind of just in this weird, okay, where do I go from here? And this is not me telling you what you should and shouldn't do, because I'm going to be so honest. Sometimes I don't even know. I definitely have moments where I'm feeling like I need to rest and recover because I do get very sleepy in the winter. I am definitely a little hibernating girly, but I also get so excited for the year ahead. I have so many goals and manifestations for 2026. It is the year of the horse in Chinese zodiac. So it is all about action, being, just full steam ahead, blinders on, lock in, which I'm really excited for. But at the same time, I definitely want to take the time to rest and reflect on all the takeaways I did have from this past year, because it was an intense year and I'm definitely not alone in that. I had so many friends go through so many crash outs this year, and while I will say I had a very abundant year and I'm so grateful for it, I also definitely had moments where I was just in full-on survival mode. If we're talking from a spiritual standpoint, this was a very cycle closing year. A lot of people shedding illusions, a lot of releasing what no longer serves us. I think a lot of people woke up in whatever context that applies for them. And we definitely saw this. There was definitely a shift in consciousness when it came to, oh, right, this is no longer working for me. I need to just let it go, because at this point holding on is more painful. So if you just survived 2025, you deserve all the applause and accolades as well. I'm telling you, man, I have had so many times where I was just hiding under my weighted blanket, sobbing, wondering how things were going to play out, being hurt. Oh my gosh, just so much pain. But on the other side of that, it was so beautiful to be able to alchemize that in my own time and be able to feel empowered, launch my Instagram, launch my TikTok, launch my podcast, launch my Substack. There was so much momentum that didn't have to, but I chose to take that pain and take that betrayal and take that loss and be able to transmute it into creativity that made me feel authentic, that made me feel seen and heard. And I am so excited to go into the new year and continue to build off of that. So as a little tangent, sorry, I just am really excited because a lot of things that, like I said before, came through struggle, came through crashing out, they really were a portal when it came to, even if I didn't know what was going to happen next, just to lean in, trust that process, ride that wave, and know that it would somehow lead me ashore to the next aligned action. And so with that, it is a little bit of a nod to what we are going to discuss today, which is the Law of Detachment. So for a lot of people, if you are a little bit into the spiritual community, you might have heard of this. This could be your first time ever hearing it. Whatever, we are going to be very basic, very layman's terms in explaining it, because it is a very misunderstood topic in my opinion. So my biggest thing is to get crystal clear as to what it means. And then I am going to share a story because we are spiritual raving baddies over here. Even if you aren't, I still consider you one. You're in the group. Welcome. I initiate you. But I'm going to talk about my chill girl crash out story and how my first American festival last year was my catalyst towards really learning how to embody detachment. Because if I was going down the same path that that festival was leading me down, I would be the most anxious, spiraling, controlling mess, even more than I was before, which is a lot to say. So I'm going to share that story. And then after that, I'm going to share some of my personal takeaways when it comes to being able to apply this in your life. Whether you are just new to this or maybe a little bit more advanced, we have something for everyone here. And I'm also going to share some of my favorite resources and my favorite teachers on detachment, because I love the idea of being able to share my lived experience. But at the same time, I do not want to ever be someone's sole point of authority on the matter. I feel like it's very important to do your own research, live your own experience, because you can only, listen to people, you can only read so many books, but you have to go out and actively practice it. And I say that to myself as well, because sometimes it is really fun to learn about things, but then actually putting it into practice is a whole other game. So with that, let's get into what the law of detachment is. So the first thing I want to say about the law of detachment is that it is not this cold, indifferent mindset that's forcing us to try and pretend to not care, because I feel like it is very commonly interpreted to be like that. But whenever we think of the word detach, I don't want you to think of it as you pretending not to care, all right? In the most layman's terms, the law of detachment states that in order to allow your manifestations or your desires or a certain outcome to come in, you must release your emotional attachment to how the outcome unfolds. And I'll say that again. You must release your emotional attachment to how the outcome unfolds. So when we're discussing this, we are still focused on our goals. We are still having something in mind to work towards, and we are still holding on to a clear intention, which, if you remember from my second episode, is like planting a seed into our subconscious that kickstarts the whole manifestation process. However, our goal with the law of detachment is to take the space and time between this very present moment, which is you listening to these words, and the moment where you, quote, have your manifestation, and to trust in the natural unfolding process. And this is where a lot of people, myself included, tend to get caught up in the micromanaging and trying to pinpoint all the details and not really allowing yourself to trust anything outside of yourself, because you've given yourself this illusion of total universal control. And this is where we unknowingly disempower ourselves, because when we operate from this place of forcing, of fear, we are closing ourselves off from anything outside of us or outside of our little bubble that could potentially be a resource or an opportunity that we would have never accounted for or predicted. Because the basis of detachment is knowing that when it comes to timelines and outcomes, there are infinite sequences and roads that can lead to what it is you desire. Even if, and this is really important, even if it doesn't look the way you mapped it out in your head. And this knowing is what helps keep you grounded in the process, so that you are able to act from a place of alignment and faith, and not just waiting around looking at your watch or your inbox or your text wondering where the evidence is. You are actively embodying the lifestyle and the choices that make it coming into your physical reality inevitable. So when we are practicing detachment, we are sending out an energetic signal that is communicating with the universe or God or source, whatever language you resonate with, that you trust that this is a co-creative process. That as long as we are doing our part within the realm of what we can control, if it's coming from a place of allowing powers outside of ourselves to help orchestrate the parts unseen, then we have so much more expansive room for things to play out. I'm sure all of us have some sort of story when it comes to meeting someone or having something just happen where it just all fell into place. And if you asked us if we could have ever predicted how it would unfold, there would be no way. And sometimes those stories or connections are some of the most aligned and authentic interactions because they didn't operate from a place of forcing or chasing. They fell into place organically because there was no emotional attachment to the outcome. And that is the thing. We all have probably unknowingly practiced attachment throughout our lives, but it is when we are faced with those deep, heartfelt desires, that's when it feels absolutely overwhelming to even consider letting go of full control. But my loves, this is when it matters the most, and this might be a tough pill to swallow, but spiraling in an attempt to control the outcome is only going to keep those desires up on that pedestal you've created for them. And I say this because I have been there so many times and gone through so much struggle with it, and honestly wish someone gave me a bit of tough love when it came to this earlier. So this is me paying it forward, but here is the good news. This is the episode where we are going to talk about it a bit more in depth, where we are going to go into my Crash Out Festival story and some very simple takeaways that you feel empowered to integrate this into your life, however that looks for you. So when it comes to the roots of the Law of Detachment, this law has been a bit of a more trending item in more modern New Age spirituality, but it actually has deep roots within Buddhism with the concept of non-attachment, with Hinduism, which teaches action without attachment to results, and even Greek Stoicism, which has a core focus on what you can and can't control. Another extremely helpful body of work that allowed me to learn about it in my own time was Neville Goddard. If you don't know who Neville Goddard is, he was a speaker and writer in the 1940s and 50s whose work really touched on a lot of topics surrounding consciousness, how your inner world shapes your outer world, being able to recognize the divine creative power within yourself, and his way of messaging and explaining things really helped me feel more empowered in my spirituality. He was, in my opinion, really one of the OGs when it came to modern manifestation framework, but it was rooted in a lot of ancient esoteric principles, so it had a very well-rounded approach that was also really digestible for that point in time. So if you're still trying to wrap your head around this concept on a very basic level, or need a bit more context into how consciousness plays a role in this, I highly recommend looking up his lectures on YouTube. You can just look up Neville Goddard. He has some audiobooks on streaming sites that are a little bit dense, but it is a really good jumping off point if you are at that part of your spiritual journey and feel like it would resonate. So when I was first introduced to detachment within the past few years, I'm not gonna lie, I had a really tough time embodying it. I intellectually understood it, but there's a difference between understanding something on a logical level and actually embodying it and having it almost be an automatic way of thinking. It really does take persistence, and a point where a lot of people, including myself, get stuck is believing before seeing, having faith in the unknown before the evidence appears, jumping before the net forms, and as someone who had built her nervous system to be very hypervigilant, hyper-independent, and rooted in control over the outcome, you can imagine how this felt both like my poison and my antidote. And this is where we have to get real when it comes to resistance and how those beliefs form over time. I understand how it can be pretty frustrating to go on TikTok or listen to a podcast about these topics and get really fired up and motivated to put into practice, and then immediately start to be met with that resistance and almost get mad at yourself in a way because it was marketed to be this sort of magic fix that would immediately change your life. And this is where I feel like I almost have this responsibility in discussing these topics to remind you that healing, mindset shifts, manifestation, anything involving your psyche pretty much does not exist in a vacuum. There is a lot of nuance, a lot of personal reflection, persistence, and a lot of trial and error. This sort of inner work is messy and doesn't have a deadline, so please do not feel discouraged if it's not immediately clicking or you need to do baby steps in order to integrate it into your life. I personally had a lot of control issues that turned out to be trauma responses. So if you start to dive into this work and feel like it's way over your head, or you start to go deeper and unravel layers and realize, oh, I actually need some assistance with this, whether that's professional help, I will always advocate that because you do not need to white knuckle your way through this process. Okay, I know that might seem like a bit of a tangent, but I really want to make sure it was said with love before we continue any further because, like I said, this universal law is powerful and yes, it can absolutely change your life, but it also isn't an overnight process. And so I just want to help us manage our expectations because I definitely am still very much actively practicing and unlearning pretty much every day. So with that, let's get into my story of the chill girl crash out that occurred last year at Lost Lands 2024. All right, so I have to set the scene because when it comes to this, I look back at it now with so much compassion because I was doing my absolute best, but your girl was struggling. So at this point in time, I've been raving for a little bit over a year. This took place in September 2024, but only in Europe and London. So I had a pretty basic grasp of raving culture, but I'd never been to an American festival, let alone Lost Lands, which, if you are a basshead or just familiar with the EDM scene, it is the dubstep Super Bowl. And in hindsight, I asked some of my friends about this festival, and they agreed that it is a very intense festival. So if you really don't know what you're getting yourself into and you really don't have a reference point, you really are just thrown into the deep end, which I 1000% was. But this festival was hyped up to the brim, which is great, but it also led me to putting it on a huge pedestal and thinking, okay, so this is probably going to be the best weekend of my life, and I need to make sure nothing goes wrong. And on top of all of this, I was flying into the States from freaking London. So we have jet lag on jet lag. I'm spending a lot of mental, physical, and financial energy with barely any sleep. Like that whole week, I think I got an average of 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. I know literally one person in the whole American rave scene who is my main point of contact, and I'm joining a group of people I've never met. And I've only really hung out with this friend that I was going with a handful of times. So in person, I was trying to be my best to be this chill girl, go with the flow. But I'm going to be so for real here. I was so strung out and mentally in the trenches. And not to mention, a lot of these DJs on the lineup really didn't visit Europe at the time, so I also had this self-appointed pressure of seeing all these artists because at the time I didn't know when I was going to be moving back to the States, so it really felt like this now or never situation. So I get there and I have a few days leading up to the actual festival where I was stuck in a hotel room alone because my friend was at work. So that was even more alone time just to spiral and have this waiting room energy that felt really frenzied. Like even just talking about it now, I have so much love for that poor girl that was me because I really did just send it when it came to flying across the world for this festival, but it was truly for the love of the game. I had already seen firsthand the community and the healing that raving had given me, and so while yes, I was strung out to the max, at the end of the day, I was just a huge dubstep girly who wanted to experience Lost Lands for the first time, so I really do need to give myself some grace. So we start the trek, and I'm doing my best to remain as chill as possible, but like I said, this was my first American festival, which is a huge culture shock considering I'd only done festivals abroad, so I had a lot of questions, uncertainty, and I could tell my friend was getting pretty annoyed by me, and I felt so bad because it was this cycle of knowing that I was probably being annoying, but I really didn't know what else to do or who to talk to because I didn't know anyone, so I really tried to bottle it up and still be that cool, chill girl that just goes with the flow, but my nervous system was absolutely fried and doing everything but that. So it was pretty much this energetic equivalent of this bubble trying not to burst. So thankfully, as the weekend went on, I started to relax a bit more and find those moments where I was able to feel present and grateful because it absolutely was worth it in terms of the music, the people, the culture, but Oh my God, it was triggering when it came to feeling out of control. And the ironic part is that I was about a year into a very intentional spiritual journey, so I was doing my best to trust that it was all going to work out. But these were circumstances and triggers that I had really never dealt with before, so it was kind of an initiation process. It was like the universe was saying, okay, you really want this, and it's going to be a big part of your life, but you need to learn pretty quickly that this is not the way to go about it, and something has to change within yourself. And I am so grateful for that, because that discomfort and that friction is what builds us up to become the person that can hold this lifestyle and not collapse from anxiety. And the fact that I was already in my spiritual journey is a detail I really try to emphasize whenever I tell this story, because it's not some sort of before and after, or, oh, I had a bad mindset and then I fixed it, now I have a good mindset sort of messaging here. This is a constant work in progress, but sometimes our crash outs kind of serve as portals into realizing, oh, this is not a sustainable way of thinking at all. And especially after being able to find ways to release this over the weekend, I realized that if I actually want to enjoy festivals and have raving become an integrated part of my life without absolutely frying my nervous system, I had to forgive myself for old thought patterns and paradigms taking the wheel, but also find the courage to reframe them so that I could continue the process of becoming the one that can have it all. Because in a way, yes, I have put the festival on this pedestal, but I truly did feel the community, the magic of that first Lost Lands, and it really did give me the motivation to start putting the Law of Detachment into action. So while yes, I was also doing some extensive inner work, from that point on up, it was pretty smooth sailing within my comfort zone. I had done 2 festivals before that with no plan, but they were closer by. If you aren't familiar with the European dubstep scene, Rampage International is an absolute game changer, and I met so many amazing people through them, so always have massive love for them. But when it came to trust in the unknown at an even deeper level, I hadn't been thrown into that deep end just yet. And this was also complete with a lot of triggers and challenges that I had kind of been stiff arming and avoiding for quite some time. So while I held on to a lot of anxiety that weekend, and I'll be so for real that I still sometimes cringe whenever I think about how stressed out I was, it really was the catalyst towards tapping into my teachings after returning home to England and finding those moments that I could ground myself when I felt myself starting to spiral again in that same context. So if you found yourself identifying with my struggles in this story, I first want to let you know that it is nothing to be ashamed of. And in fact, I sort of wish that it was more common to talk about this sort of stuff, because if we want to keep raving to the grave, we also need to recognize when it's doing more harm than good to our mental state so we can use it as an opportunity to grow. Raves and festivals really do serve as a mirror when it comes to how we handle stress, and can also be pretty emotionally charged, especially depending on the people you're with or the headspace you're in. We always say that raving is a form of therapy, which it absolutely is, but therapy also comes with learning how to handle being triggered and challenged. And while that's not exactly marketable, I think it's really important to acknowledge so that when feelings do arise, we can feel more empowered and trust ourselves to be able to move through these moments of unpredictability without feeling overwhelmed. So because raves are sensation and stimulation overload at times, we aren't trying to disassociate or zone out. Like we said before, detachment is not emotionless, it is fluidity, it is flow, it is not making anything outside of yourself the sole responsibility for your happiness. Do you see the difference? So when it comes to putting the law of detachment into action at festivals, we aren't trying to be perfect or act as if everything is sunshine and rainbows, even when it's clearly not. We are focusing on setting intentions, noticing where we personally hold heightened expectations, and practicing regulation for radical acceptance. So if you are following along, if you're feeling anxious and overwhelmed every time you feel things are beyond your control, if you are noticing you're not able to enjoy the moment because you're constantly measuring up to what you've put on a pedestal, If you just want to be able to find flow and build healthy habits, keep listening, take notes, we're about to lock in. Now, we talked about setting intentions in the previous episode on viewing festivals as wellness retreats, and this is extremely helpful if you feel like you need something to anchor yourself, but we also don't want to be so narrow-minded that we're feeling like we're going off script if it's exactly not what we imagine in our heads, right? So rather, we want to focus on the feelings we want to experience, not the exact experience itself. Do you notice the difference? So when we're approaching a festival or a show with thoughts like, I need to get real for this DJ, I need to meet a rave bae tonight, I need to get this video of this exact drop, which, let's be real, are totally normal desires, so I'm not going to act like these aren't valid. But do you see how they're offering a very limited scope in terms of what's going to make you enjoy the night? Like, let's say you don't get rail, but you end up next to this random group with the best vibes and end up making new friends. Or maybe you didn't meet someone, but you were able to side quest and catch up with a friend that was long overdue. Or maybe, you didn't get that perfect video, but you were able to feel the music and remember why you loved this scene in the first place. Maybe these weren't exactly what you came in looking for, but if you were so focused on the discrepancy between your expectations and the present moment, you might have completely written it off and not appreciated it. So what we're trying instead with setting our intentions, we can still have desires and things to look forward to, but we focus on the state that we want to embody. And like I said in the previous episode, you can either come up with these beforehand or have it in your notes app as a reminder. And if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, it can be a really good anchor point to have on hand and remind you that we aren't here to chase an outcome. We are here to practice presence and joy and release, even if we have some detours or wobbles along the way. So I'm a big affirmations girly, and I know that they can sometimes feel cheesy or forced if you've looked up some general ones, but throughout the episode, I'm going to sprinkle in some that you can have for inspiration if any of them resonate, or if you start to have some aha moments and want to tailor some specifically towards what you've been currently working through, go on ahead. Now, the next takeaway we want to look at is noticing where we tend to hold heightened expectations. And to do this, we're going to pivot really quickly back to my boy Neville Goddard that I mentioned earlier, because one of his teachings that can really help us start to practice detachment is the concept of our outer world is a reflection of our inner state. You might have also heard this concept with the phrase as within, so without, which is one of my personal favorites, but its main point is that our inner state affects how we view the world and, on a deeper level, how the outer world interacts with us and what gravitates towards our energetic field. So, what does this mean? When we start to focus less on things outside of our control in the outer world and instead focus on our inner state, we start to move through our raves or our festivals holding a much more empowered energy that says, I don't need these things outside of myself to validate my experience. I bring the energy, I bring the vibes, I am my own little energetic disco ball. And honestly, that might even be something you can add to your intentions, because you can really feel how it starts to shift your focus from things outside of yourself to realize you can literally be the vibe you wish to see in the world. So now we have a general working idea of when it comes to knowing our inner state can shift what's reflected back to us in our outside world experience. And as a disclaimer, this isn't something that should scare you or that you should feel like you have to constantly monitor. This is fluid. This is human. It's like its own little dance. Because at the end of the day, we are dealing with the real world, with people and circumstances beyond our control. But what this does is when we put the focus back on ourselves, that what we can control, and remember that we can choose how we respond, how we choose to self-regulate, how we choose to approach a situation that is inherently neutral, we get to decide if we want to let it define us or move through it, knowing that moment is going to pass anyways. This is us taking our power back and knowing that even if we do start to feel overwhelmed or triggered or frustrated, we can meet these emotions, sit with them, and let them pass and not try to deny or suppress them. I've noticed that for myself, a lot of the times it's not necessarily the emotion itself that starts the spiral, but rather the story I attach to that emotion that builds and builds. So this is why it's really helpful to start to become aware of where we hold heightened expectations, because that clues us into the stories we tell ourselves about these expectations. So when we start to dissolve these false narratives, the emotions will inherently become less pervasive. So what I want you to do right now, or whenever you have time to reflect, is to think of 1 or 2 attachments that, when it comes to festivals, you seem to really have trouble managing expectations with. Is it expecting to connect with certain people in a certain way? Is it coming off a certain way, trying to be a chill girl or the one who's always having fun? Is it logistics, planning for weather, travel, crowds? I want you to only focus on the ones that stand out the most to you. We don't want to overwhelm you to the point where you're constantly analyzing and not trying to have fun or be in the moment. So if you want to focus on literally just one thing you've been hung up on, that is an amazing start, because even the tiniest shifts of consciousness and intentionality are so powerful and can cause this sort of domino effect. So don't force yourself to completely uproot your mindset overnight. But once you do set your sights on a part of the festival you tend to get worked up on, we are going to do something that might feel out of your comfort zone, but I think once you give it a singular shot without expecting to change overnight, you might surprise yourself. So what you're going to do, you're going to give yourself an expectation hall pass. What is this? It's giving yourself permission, whether it's just for the day, for the weekend, even for one set, is to ask yourself, what if I just let this play out? What if I had this radical idea that everything could unfold just as it's supposed to once I get out of my own way? What if I let the foot off the brakes this one time and just let myself focus on being present without needing this moment to be any different? And when you move through this way of thinking, we're approaching it from a place of curiosity. We aren't getting mad at ourselves if we catch ourselves falling back into old ways of thinking. We can notice it, laugh at ourselves, and say, oh, we don't need to think like that anymore, and move forward. So I'll give an example that really does showcase my personal progress in detachment when it comes to my first Lost Lands compared to this year's Lost Lands. So a big hang up for me used to be weather and logistics and scheduling. After all the traveling I'd done, it had played a huge factor in how my travel plans would play out. So it's completely understandable that I would naturally form this stress over time. However, just because we understand why we held onto attachments and expectations does not mean we have to carry those with us if they aren't serving us or our energy anymore, right? So during Lost Lands this year, on the 3rd day, there was a thunderstorm watch, which of course is a very big trigger for stress depending on where you're staying, how you're getting to the venue, etc. And so we literally were just about to enter security when they told us to turn back and seek shelter. And I'll be so for real, I even surprised myself with how chill I was with this, like genuinely chill. I just looked at my friends, including the same friend who witnessed my crash out last year, and said, okay, I guess we're just gonna go back. And in doing so, it was so interesting because our whole group had this collective calm energy about us. We were bummed, of course, but there was also a strong sense of acceptance, which ended up being one of our greatest assets because we were able to go back to our campsite, prepare for the upcoming storm with plenty of time to spare. And we even had our own little party during the storm itself. So when it was time to go back in, we had already made new friends and connections and memories that might not have happened had things gone according to the original plan. And this is one of those moments where you really do learn that the experience is what you make of it. It is not 100% fun at times, and of course we would have preferred to gone in at least at the original time, but leaning into that acceptance and detachment from a certain outcome was the core difference between us sitting and pouting and complaining, or us saying, you know what? We bring the vibe, we embody the energy we want to experience. And as within, so without, we felt the collective vibe shift and everyone was in such good spirits. So that's just one example, and I completely understand that it might take some more time and practice for others, but let me tell you, with persistence and approaching it from a place of curiosity and self-compassion is what is going to have you noticing and celebrating those small wins, because they do build up after time. You'll have that moment of, hey, I gave myself an expectation hall pass and things worked out just fine. Because that's the thing that we sometimes forget when it comes to being on a healing journey. We can intellectualize it and understand these concepts on a certain level, but if we are keeping ourselves in a comfort bubble and not out there experiencing life, including all of its imperfections and triggers, we have no friction to grow. So play around with that. Ask yourself, like I said before, let's just see what happens if I take a step back and let this moment be. If I can see how I can take responsibility for what I can control and release what I can't. Now, the third aspect I want to cover in this episode is, in my opinion, the most tangible way we're going to be able to put this into practice and not have it be this fluffy, idealistic concept that sounds good in theory but impractical in execution. And that is self-regulation geared towards presence and radical acceptance. Now, when I use the term radical acceptance, there are a few interpretations of the phrase, but what I've grown to understand it as is acceptance of the whole, the good, the not so good, and everything in between. And the radical part is even allowing yourself to feel the disappointment or frustration and knowing these feelings will pass as well. And this is different from the law of detachment. The law of detachment is about your relationship to outcomes, while the radical acceptance is about your relationship to the present moment. However, being able to combine these two allows us to still hold space for our desires, but also meet life on life's terms. And in doing so, we're still able to create excitement and enjoyment without expectation and clinging. So when we are able to accept the weather delays, the rude crowd, the people in our group that are being difficult, this acceptance doesn't mean that we desire it or endorse it, but we know that the only way out is through moving through those emotions without attachment and realizing that we do not have to attach a story in order to let it pass. Because like we said before, at times when we feel an emotion or trigger, it's more often than not the story that we are making it about the emotion or trigger that's making it fester or snowball into something more intense. So what does self-regulation look like? So while I'm going to give some examples, this is not a fully comprehensive list, of course. So what I'm going to do in addition to this is include a link in the show notes for some more professional resources, because while I have made progress and I do have my lived experience, which is very valuable, I also have a responsibility as a creator to provide you with options. So the very base layer of self-regulation is nervous system regulation. And I know that we've heard this term thrown around a lot, so it is kind of difficult to really understand what it means at times. But from my interpretation, it is just making sure that your body is in a stable enough condition to where it feels safe to move forward, that it's not stuck in this fight or flight. Because when we are stuck in this fight or flight response, it really doesn't matter what rational reframe thoughts that we're trying to feed it. All it's focused on is that everything around it is a threat. And when it comes to feeling like we're out of control, that something isn't according to plan, I can definitely empathize for how this flight or response is triggered. So we want to make sure that we are taking a moment to collect ourselves. So what does this look like? It depends obviously on the situation or context that you're in, but some examples are stepping out of the crowd to get some air, practicing breath work, which can be just as simple as taking some very slow, deep breaths. This can also look like making sure you're getting some water. If you need to sit down, if you need to feel yourself grounded, and by this I mean feel your feet in the ground, feel the bass in your chest, feel the wind in your face. And like I said before, I'll include some links when it comes to specifically grounding exercises, because I feel like this is such a core step in being able to move forward with that acceptance and that detachment. So now that we have been able to get our nervous system a little bit more stabilized, we are in a place where we are able to reframe what we are feeling, right? And when we do this, we are doing this without judgment, without shaming ourselves, without getting mad at ourselves that we are feeling a certain way, because that is the whole point of radical acceptance, right? We are accepting that we are feeling what we are feeling and that it's okay to move past it, that we don't need to attach a meaning to it. So when we are dealing with something, say, that is beyond our control or has a discrepancy between what we are experiencing and what we are expecting, we can keep it very simple and say something along the lines of, this is a moment I can't control, I can only respond to it. And when we do this, we are putting ourselves back into the experience. We are taking ourselves out of this story that we think has to happen, and we are meeting life on life's terms. And this is where we are able to take responsibility for what we can do in that very moment. And when we do this from a more stabilized standpoint, when we regulate our nervous system to the best of our ability. Like, obviously, we don't need to be this perfectly calm Zen person in order to practice this, but we are at the very least stepping back and looking at the bigger picture and saying, you know what? This night can unfold in an infinite amount of ways, and I can have a truly amazing experience. I can feel the joy, the connection, the release, all of the inner states that I want to experience, alluding back to Neville Goddard. I can experience all of this without needing to dictate exactly how it unfolds. And when I allow myself to be present without searching for another moment, I'm also able to show up in my most authentic, aligned energy. And this in turn is such a blessing to those around me, because when I show up as my most authentic self, I am coming from a place of unconditional love. And that's the key word. Unconditional. It doesn't have to be a certain way, a certain circumstance. We can just allow this moment to be as it is. And when we are giving ourselves that permission to be authentic, regardless of circumstances, we are also allowing other people permission to do the same. And the more we practice this blend of self-regulation and communicating what we need in that moment to people that might be able to support us, we start to learn that festivals and raves are this ebb and flow of energy. And we start to embody this sort of empowerment that says, I know that no matter what happens, I take responsibility for my own pleasure, my own joy. And that includes knowing that I can let others be who they are. I know that I can trust my future self's capacity to figure things out while loosening my grip on things that aren't in this here and now. I know that once I start to show the universe that I trust it to take care of me, even if I don't know how it will all unfold, it becomes a co-creative process that gives me the space to be astonished and to look back and realize, well, of course I couldn't know what was going to happen, because I would have not been able to let it unfold as perfectly as it did. So these are my 3 main guiding points when it comes to putting the law of detachment into practice at festivals. To review, we set intentions that are geared towards openness, towards uncertainty. Notice without judgment where you hold heightened expectations, and practice self-regulation during those waves of emotion. There, of course, can be so much more to unpack, but I want to keep it fairly concise for this episode, because at the end of the day, we aren't doing this as a means to overanalyze or try to fix any part of ourselves. This sort of awareness and reflection is meant to enhance our experience through a different lens if the lens that we've been using has been doing more harm than good for our mental state. And it also equips and empowers us so that when detours and side quests and wobbles do pop up, we are able to meet them from a much more grounded headspace and not have them dictate how our experience goes. And this is the beauty of blending our healing and spiritual journey with raving and festivals. Like I said before, these sort of environments are amazing for release and escape and celebration, but they inevitably serve as a mirror towards how we move through this world. So at the end of the day, our biggest goal is to be able to experience these weekends in a way that enhances our lives and fosters genuine connections. And when we are able to take these desires and expectations that we have put on a pedestal and start to realize that yes, we can experience what we desire, but we can do it in a way that is expansive and does not need to rely on a scripted, picture-perfect mission plan that can't go off course. So with that, I want to thank you so much for listening with an open mind and being able to take what resonates, leaving what doesn't. Being able to blend healing and spirituality and psychology and raving is somehow so niche, but also such a universal experience, because at the end of the day, we are all looking for experiences that make us feel alive and part of something. And to be able to use my voice and the lessons I've learned to help others who identify with those feelings is such a blessing. If you enjoyed this episode or feel like a friend or a loved one would resonate with it as well, please feel free to share it or leave a 5-star review, because the more we're able to get this out there, the more likely Spotify will recommend it with other spiritual raving baddies. And we need more people like you in this world, because when one of us begins to lean into our authenticity, we create a space for others to feel safe to do the same. So if you'd like to connect even more, please feel free to stop by my other socials. On both Instagram and TikTok, I am under the handle Witchy and Wonky, and all the information you need is in the show notes. And with that, I'm Rachel Brady. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.